It was a suffocatingly humid Tuesday evening in Savannah, Georgia. The air was thick with the scent of rain and blooming magnolias, but inside my mother-in-law's pristine, historic home, the atmosphere was bone-chillingly cold. I was standing in the hallway, holding a stack of freshly laundered linens, while my husband, Mark, was out back helping his brother with the grill. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, was 68 years old, a prominent Southern matriarch who valued family reputation above all else. To the outside world, she was a saint. To me, she was a locked vault. Alaina, her sharp, polished voice cut through the quiet hallway. I turned to see her standing near the entrance of her private study. Her manicured hand was resting heavily on the frame of her antique mahogany desk. "Leave the linens on the armchair." "And Alaina?" She paused, her pale blue eyes narrowing into slits. "Don't open that bottom left drawer. I've kept it locked for a reason. Some things are better left undisturbed. A normal person would have walked away. But 20 minutes later, Eleanor left for a quick run to the local grocery store to grab some peach cobbler for dessert. The house fell completely silent, save for the hum of the air conditioner. As I walked past the study to head to the kitchen, my eyes instinctively drifted to the mahogany desk. The bottom left drawer wasn't fully closed. A tiny sliver of polished metal, a brass key, was sticking out of the lock, left behind in her rush. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. In our 7 years of marriage, Mark's family had always felt like a beautifully painted picture with hollow backs. There was an unspoken rule. You don't ask about Mark's father, who supposedly died in a tragic car accident when Mark was just a toddler. I stepped into the room. The floorboards didn't make a sound. I knelt, gripped the cold brass key, and pulled. Seconds later, our entire family secret was exposed. Inside the drawer, there were no expensive jewels or old tax documents. Instead, my eyes fell upon a thick, faded yellow manila envelope tied with a black string. Resting right on top of it was a framed photograph. I picked it up, my hands trembling. It was a picture of a man holding a baby boy. The baby was undeniably my husband, Mark. He had the exact same crescent-shaped birthmark on his left wrist. But the man holding him was not the father whose portrait hung proudly in Eleanor's living room. This man had dark, intense eyes, a jagged scar running down his jawline, and a rugged look that didn't fit into the high society world Eleanor had built. Underneath the photograph lay a stack of folded newspaper clippings from the Savannah Morning News, dated October 1996. The headline screamed in bold, black ink, "Local bank manager presumed dead in river accident." My chest tightened as I read the article. It detailed how Arthur Vance, Eleanor's husband and Mark's supposed father, had crashed his car into the Savannah River. His body was never recovered. But as I dug deeper into the envelope, I found something that made the air leave my lungs. It was a pristine, valid U.S. passport issued in 2018, 22, years after Arthur Vance had died. I opened the passport. Staring back at me was the older version of the man from the framed photograph. The name on the passport read Arthur Vance. He wasn't dead. He had been alive, traveling, and living a completely parallel life while his son grew up grieving a ghost. But the final blow was at the very bottom of the drawer. It was a handwritten ledger, filled with Eleanor's elegant cursive handwriting. Page after page detailed monthly wire transfers of exactly $5,000, sent to an offshore account in Nassau, Bahamas. The payments had been consistent for over 25 years. Beside the final entry, dated just last week, Eleanor had written a single, chilling note: "Payment sent. Keep him away from Savannah. Mark must never know." It wasn't just a secret. It was blackmail. Or worse, hush money. My mother-in-law had systematically paid off her own dead husband to keep him away from their lives, fabricating a tragic death to maintain her pristine social standing. Suddenly, the heavy front door of the house creaked open. "Alaina? Mark?" Eleanor's voice echoed from the foyer, followed by the rustle of grocery bags. My heart leaped into my throat. Panic seized me. I scrambled to put the ledger, the passport, and the clippings back into the envelope. My fingers fumbled with the string. In my rush, the framed photograph slipped from my hand, clattering against the hardwood floor. The glass shattered into a dozen glittering pieces. Footsteps were already heading down the hallway toward the study. There was no time to clean it up. I shoved the drawer shut, turned the key, and spun around just as Eleanor appeared in the doorway. Eleanor froze in the doorway, her eyes instantly dropping from my pale face to the shattered glass surrounding the mahogany desk. The grocery bag in her arms slipped slightly, the scent of fresh peach cobbler suddenly feeling nauseatingly sweet. For 3 agonizing seconds, the only sound in the room was the low hum of the ceiling fan. "Alaina," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that felt colder than ice. "What did I tell you about this room?" I was looking for a pen to write down the grocery list," I stammered, my voice betraying the sheer terror clawing at my throat. I tripped over the rug and hit the desk. Eleanor didn't buy it. She stepped into the room, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. She didn't look like a fragile 68-year-old woman anymore. She looked like a predator cornering its prey. She looked down at the locked drawer. The key was still slightly crooked from my rushed attempt to lock it. Without a word, she reached down, picked up the broken frame, and turned the photograph over. Her face drained of all color, her lips pressing into a thin, bloodless line. "You opened it," she whispered, her eyes locking onto mine with a fury that made me step back. "You have no idea what you've done. You have no right to dig into things that do not concern you." "That man is Mark's father, Eleanor," I said, my military-braced courage finally kicking in. My father had been a police officer in Atlanta. I knew when someone was hiding a crime. He isn't dead. You've been paying him to stay away. You lied to Mark his entire life. He cried on his wedding day, wishing his dad was there. Eleanor stepped closer, her hand gripping the edge of the desk so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Mark is weak, Alaina, just like his father was. Arthur didn't just die in that river. He stole $3 million from the bank he managed. If the truth came out, our family name would have been dragged through the mud. Mark would have grown up the son of a fugitive. I saved this family. I built a legacy out of the ashes. By paying blackmail?" I countered. "That ledger goes back 25 years. You're harboring a criminal." "I am protecting my son," she hissed, her eyes wild. "And if you breathe a single word of this to Mark, I will personally ensure your life in this town becomes a living hell. Who do you think the local authorities will believe? A respected pillar of the community or an outsider who married into her wealth?" Before I could reply, the sliding glass door at the back of the house opened. "Hey, Mom, Alaina? The grill is ready," Mark's voice called out from the kitchen. Eleanor's demeanor shifted instantly. It was terrifying. In a fraction of a second, the wild-eyed blackmailer vanished, replaced by the warm, smiling Southern host. "We'll be right out, sweetheart," she called back sweetly. Then she turned to me, her voice dropping to a low, lethal murmur. "Choose your next words very carefully, Alaina, because they will decide the fate of your marriage." My heart pounded against my ribs as we walked out to the patio. Mark was standing by the grill, a spatula in hand, looking relaxed and happy. Seeing him like that, completely oblivious to the decades of deceit that had shaped his entire existence, made a wave of fierce protectiveness wash over me. Eleanor slipped past me, offering Mark a warm, maternal smile. "Alaina had a little mishap in the study, darling. She knocked over an old picture frame. But everything is perfectly fine now." She shot me a warning glance over her shoulder, a silent command to fall in line. I looked at Mark. I looked at the man I had promised to love and protect. If I kept this secret, I would become just like Eleanor, a gatekeeper of lies, poisoning our marriage from the inside out. "Actually, Mark," I said, my voice steady, though my hands were shaking, "everything is not fine." Mark lowered the spatula, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean, babe?" "Alaina, don't be dramatic," Eleanor intervened, her voice tightening. "It was just a broken frame. It was a picture of your father, Mark, and he isn't dead." The words hung in the warm Georgia air, heavy and unbelievable. Mark laughed, a confused, hollow sound. "What are you talking about? My dad died when I was 2. She's having some sort of episode, Mark. Eleanor cried out, stepping between us. Alaina, I think you need to leave my house immediately. She has a passport, Mark, I shouted over Eleanor's shoulder. A passport issued to Arthur Vance in 2018 and a ledger showing she's been wire transferring him $5,000 every single month to keep him in the Bahamas. He stole money and she faked his death to protect her precious social standing. Enough! Eleanor screamed, dropping her Southern Belle facade entirely. Her face was twisted in rage. You ungrateful little viper. You've ruined everything. Mark stared at his mother, his face turning entirely pale. He had never heard her raise her voice like that, let alone use such venomous words. He looked at me, then back at Eleanor, who was breathing heavily, her eyes darting around as if searching for a way to rewrite reality. Where is it? Mark asked, his voice barely a whisper. In the bottom left drawer of the mahogany desk, I said quietly. Mark didn't hesitate. He dropped the spatula and ran into the house. Eleanor tried to chase after him, yelling his name, but I blocked her path on the patio. Get out of my way, she hissed, her eyes filled with pure hatred. No, I replied, standing my ground. It's over, Eleanor. The truth is out. By the time Eleanor and I reached the study, Mark was sitting on the floor. The yellow manila envelope was in his lap. He was holding the 2018 passport, staring at his father's older, weathered face. Tears were streaming silently down his cheeks as he flipped through the ledger, recognizing his mother's elegant handwriting. Eleanor fell to her knees beside him, her voice cracking. Mark, baby, listen to me. I did it for you. I didn't want you to be the son of a thief. I wanted you to have a real life, a good name. Mark slowly pulled his hand away from her touch. He looked at her as if she were a complete stranger. You let me grieve a dead man for 30 years, he whispered, his voice cracking with immense pain. You let me cry at his grave. And all this time, you were just buying his silence to protect your vanity. He stood up, clutching the envelope to his chest, and walked over to me. He took my hand, his grip tight and desperate. Let's go home, Alaina, he said. We walked out of that house, leaving Eleanor alone in her pristine hollow mansion, surrounded by the shattered glass of her own lies. The months that followed were incredibly difficult, but they brought a profound sense of healing. Mark cut all contact with his mother. With the help of a private investigator and the authorities, the truth about Arthur Vance was finally brought to light, and the extortion scheme was shut down. It wasn't the easy path, and our family dynamic was forever altered. But as I sat on our porch with Mark a few months later, watching the sunset over the Georgia horizon, he wrapped his arm around my shoulder. For the first time in years, the heavy invisible shadow over our lives was gone. We didn't have a perfect painted picture family anymore, but we had something infinitely better. We had the truth,